overprotective rescuing. When your partner's stressed about work, struggling with a friend conflict, or dealing with family drama, and your first instinct is to jump in and fix everything, that feels like love. It feels like support. But here's what's actually happening. You're sending the message that you don't think they can handle their own life. Every time you swoop in to solve their problems, pay their bills when they overspend, call their boss to explain why they're late, or take over tasks because you think you'll do them better, you're not protecting them. You're infantilizing them. And over time, this creates a really specific dynamic. They start to feel incapable, and you start to feel resentful that you're carrying everything. The psychological term for this is codependent rescuing, and it usually comes from your own anxiety, not their actual need for help. You're managing your discomfort with their struggle by controlling the situation, but people need to face consequences, make mistakes, and figure things out. That's how adults build confidence and competence. When you constantly rescue someone, you rob them of their agency and create a parent-child dynamic where you're the capable one and they're the perpetual victim who needs saving. And here's the brutal part. They'll eventually resent you for it, even though they accepted the help, because nobody actually wants to be with someone who treats them like they're incompetent. Sacrificing your own needs completely. There's this cultural narrative that real love means total selflessness. Put your partner first always, ignore your own wants, be endlessly giving. And sure, relationships require compromise and consideration. But when you erase yourself completely, when you consistently prioritize their needs over your own, when you suppress your desires and preferences to keep them happy, you're not being loving, you're disappearing. And here's what happens in that dynamic. First, you build resentment, maybe slowly, maybe quietly, but it's there. Every time you say you're fine with whatever they want, when you're actually not fine. Every time you skip something important to you because they need you. Every time you mold yourself into what they want instead of being who you are, a little piece of resentment gets filed away. Eventually, that resentment either explodes or turns into quiet contempt. Second, and this is crucial, they lose respect for you. Not consciously necessarily, but attraction requires a certain amount of mystery, autonomy, and self-possession. When someone has no boundaries, no separate interests, no opinions of their own, they become less interesting. The thing you thought would make them love you more, your complete devotion and self-sacrifice, actually makes them value you less. People want a partner, not a doormat. They want someone with their own life, their own passions, their own backbone. Total self-erasure doesn't create intimacy. It creates imbalance and eventual disconnection, trying to fix their pain. Your partner comes to you upset. Maybe they had a terrible day at work, or they're anxious about something, or they're processing something painful. And your immediate response is to jump into problem-solving mode. You offer solutions, give advice, explain what they should do differently, try to logic them out of their feelings. You think you're helping. You think that's what support looks like. But here's what they're actually experiencing. They feel unheard. They feel like their emotions are being dismissed as problems to solve rather than feelings to be felt. And this is one of the most common disconnects in relationships, especially when one partner is more solution-oriented and the other is more emotion-oriented. The person offering solutions thinks they're being supportive and helpful. The person receiving solutions feels invalidated and alone. What's happening psychologically is that you're uncomfortable with their discomfort, so you're trying to fix it to relieve your own anxiety. But emotions aren't problems to be solved. Sometimes people just need to be sad, angry, or scared, and they need someone to sit with them in that feeling without trying to make it go away. Presence is often more powerful than solutions. The ability to say, that sounds really hard, and just listen without jumping into fix, manage, or redirect is actually the more loving response. When you constantly try to fix their pain, you're accidentally communicating that their feelings are burdensome to you and need to be eliminated as quickly as possible. And that makes people feel fundamentally alone in the relationship. Excessive reassurance seeking. Asking your partner if they still love you occasionally is normal. Needing reassurance during vulnerable moments is human. But when you're constantly asking, do you still love me? Are you sure you're not mad? Do you think I'm attractive? Are we okay? Multiple times a day, every single day? That's not vulnerability. That's anxiety being outsourced. And here's the trap. The more you ask, the less reassuring the answer becomes. Because you're essentially asking your partner to manage your emotional regulation for you. Each time they say, yes, I love you, it satisfies you for maybe an hour, maybe a day, and then the anxiety comes back and you need to hear it again. This creates a cycle where no amount of reassurance is ever enough, because the real issue isn't whether they love you. The real issue is that you don't believe it, or you don't believe you're worthy of it, and that's an inside job. From their perspective, this pattern is exhausting. It puts constant emotional labor on them to prop up your self-esteem and soothe your fears. And over time, it actually pushes them away, which is the exact outcome you were afraid of. The excessive reassurance seeking becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They start to feel drained by the constant need to validate you, and they begin to withdraw, which makes you seek even more reassurance, which makes them withdraw more. It's the anxious avoidant trap in real time. The loving thing you think you're doing, being vulnerable about your fears, actually becomes a burden that erodes the relationship. By the way, if you're finding this helpful, I post content like this regularly. I'd appreciate if you subscribed. Thanks. Love bombing after every fight. So you had a huge fight. Things were said. Feelings were hurt. And your immediate response is to come back with grand gestures. Flowers, gifts, elaborate apologies, overwhelming affection, promises to change everything. It feels romantic. It feels like you're showing how much you care and how committed you are to making things right. But here's what's actually happening. You're using intensity to bypass the actual work of repair. Real repair requires sitting in the discomfort of what happened, understanding the underlying issue, discussing what needs to change, and actually changing the pattern. But love bombing after conflict short circuits that process. It floods the relationship with positive emotions before you've actually resolved anything, which feels good in the moment but leaves the core issue completely unaddressed. This pattern usually comes from shame. You feel terrible about the fight, about what you said or did, and you're desperate to make those feelings go away. So you overwhelm your partner with affection to get back to feeling good as quickly as possible. But that's not conflict resolution. That's conflict avoidance wrapped in roses and apologies. And over time, this creates a really toxic cycle. Fight, love bomb, temporary good feelings, underlying issues still there, fight again about the same thing, love bomb again. The relationship becomes this roller coaster of intense conflict followed by intense affection, and neither of you ever address what's actually broken. Your partner starts to associate your grand gestures with avoidance rather than genuine change, and the love bombing loses its impact entirely. Forcing quality time. Your partner says they need some space. Maybe they want a night alone, maybe they need time to process something, maybe they just need to decompress without you. And your response is to take it personally, to push for connection, to insist on quality time because you miss them or because you're worried that space means distance. So you keep texting, keep suggesting plans, keep trying to pull them back in. You think you're fighting for the relationship. You think you're showing them how much you care. But here's the reality. When someone asks for space and you refuse to give it, you're not showing love. You're showing that your need for connection matters more than their need for autonomy. And this dynamic, pursuing when someone withdraws, is one of the most destructive patterns in relationships. It's the classic anxious avoidant trap. The more you pursue, the more they withdraw. The more they withdraw, the more anxious you become. So you pursue harder, and the cycle escalates until someone breaks. What's happening psychologically is that you're equating space with abandonment. In your mind, if they need time alone, it means they don't love you or they're pulling away permanently. But for a lot of people, especially those with more avoidant attachment styles, space isn't rejection. It's how they regulate their emotions and maintain their sense of self. Forcing quality time when someone needs space creates the exact distance you're trying to prevent. It makes them feel suffocated and misunderstood, and it erodes their trust that you'll respect their boundaries. Excessive checking in. You text your partner throughout the day. Good morning. How'd you sleep? How's work going? What are you doing now? Did you eat lunch? How was your meeting? Are you leaving soon? Let me know when you get home. It feels caring. It feels like you're staying connected and showing interest in their day. But here's the line. There's a difference between caring check-ins and surveillance disguised as concern. When your partner starts to feel like they have to report their movements and activities constantly, when they feel guilty for not responding quickly enough, when your texts feel less like connection and more like monitoring, you've crossed from care into control. And this usually comes from anxiety, not malice. You're managing your own discomfort about not knowing where they are or what they're doing by keeping constant tabs on them. But from their perspective, it feels suffocating. It communicates distrust. Even if you say, I just want to make sure you're okay, the subtext they're receiving is, I don't trust you to be okay without constant contact with me. And over time, this erodes their sense of autonomy and independence. They start to feel like they can't just exist in their own day without having to check in with you constantly. Healthy relationships have space for both connection and autonomy. People need to be able to go about their day, focus on work, spend time with friends, just exist, without feeling like they're accountable to their partner for every moment. Excessive checking in, even when it comes from a place of love and concern, creates resentment and makes people feel controlled rather than cared for. Staying just to not hurt them. You know the relationship is over. Maybe you've known for months, maybe even years. The spark is gone. You're not in love anymore. You're staying out of obligation, guilt, or because you don't want to hurt them, and that feels noble. It feels like you're being kind by not breaking their heart. But here's the brutal truth. Staying in a relationship you've mentally checked out of is the cruelest thing you can do. Because every day you stay is a day you're lying to them. Every I love you say that you don't fully mean is a betrayal. Every time you go through the motions of the relationship while knowing you want out, you're wasting their time. And time, especially when it comes to relationships and life planning, is the one resource they can't get back. You think you're protecting them from pain, but you're actually prolonging it and making it worse. The person you're with can sense that something's off. They might not know exactly what, but they feel the distance, the lack of genuine presence, the hollow quality of your affection. And they're living in this confusing space where the relationship looks intact but feels wrong. When you finally do leave, and you will eventually, the pain will be compounded by the realization that you stayed out of pity, that you were going through the motions, that they were investing in a relationship that you knew was already over. The truly loving thing is to be honest and let them go, so they can process the loss and eventually find someone who actually wants to be with them. Staying to avoid hurting someone is a lie you tell yourself to avoid the discomfort of being the bad guy. But in reality, you're not being kind, you're being cowardly, absorbing their emotions completely. Your partner's in a bad mood, so you're in a bad mood. They're anxious, so you become anxious. They're upset about something, and suddenly, you're carrying that weight as if it's happening to you. You think this is empathy, you think you're being a supportive partner by feeling what they feel, but what's actually happening is emotional enmeshment. You've lost the ability to separate their emotional experience from your own. And this creates a really dysfunctional dynamic where neither of you has solid ground. When one person's in distress, you both spiral. There's no emotional regulation happening because you're both drowning in the same feelings. This pattern usually comes from codependency or anxious attachment. You've learned to monitor other people's emotions as a way to feel safe, and you've become so attuned to their internal state that you've lost touch with your own. The problem is that this doesn't actually help them, and it destroys you. They need a partner who can remain grounded when they're struggling, someone who can hold space for their emotions without being consumed by them. But when you absorb everything they feel, you can't be that person. You just become another person who needs soothing and support. And over time, this creates resentment on both sides. They feel like they can't express their emotions without it becoming your crisis. You feel exhausted from constantly managing feelings that aren't even yours. True empathy involves understanding what someone is feeling without losing yourself in it. It's being able to say, I see that you're hurting, and I'm here with you, without making their hurt your identity. Absorbing their emotions completely isn't love. It's a loss of self that ultimately serves no one. Never expressing negative feelings. You're frustrated with your partner, but you don't say anything. You're hurt by something they did, but you brush it off. You have needs that aren't being met, but you tell yourself it's fine. You keep everything positive, never rock the boat, always maintain harmony. Because expressing anger or disappointment feels unloving, right? Feels like you're being difficult or creating problems. So you swallow it, you smile, you say everything's great, and on the surface, the relationship looks perfect, no conflict, no tension, just smooth sailing. But underneath, you're building a reservoir of resentment that will eventually either explode or quietly kill the relationship. Here's what people don't realize about conflict. It's not the enemy of intimacy. Conflict avoidance is. When you never express negative feelings, you're not creating harmony. You're creating false intimacy. You're presenting a curated version of yourself that's always agreeable, always easy, always fine. And your partner falls in love with that version, not the real you. They have no idea what actually bothers you, what you actually need, what your actual boundaries are. So when the resentment finally surfaces, either as an explosion over something small or as a quiet withdrawal where you just check out emotionally, they're blindsided. They thought everything was fine because you said everything was fine. This pattern often comes from childhood experiences where expressing needs or negative emotions led to rejection or punishment. So you learn to suppress anything that might create conflict. But in adult relationships, the ability to express dissatisfaction, set boundaries, and work through disagreements is essential. Without it, you don't have a real relationship. You have a performance, and eventually, the person performing gets exhausted, and the relationship crumbles under the weight of all those unexpressed feelings. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future uploads. Thanks for watching.